Hi, folks. With Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the massive monumental grift and hustle that is compensation to be paid to all minorities by white people. Only white people must pay it. And only minorities, as in black and brown folks, must receive it. Now, the logic that's applied to justify this is to snot-nosed, sociology, college kid, placard waving type street punk attitude and methods of reasoning. So we can pretty much dismiss it. But given the head of steam it's built up, and it's been talked about in every white country, that some sort of compensation must be paid for some past misdeeds, most of them imagined or contrived. So let's have a look at that, and let's try and look at it more broadly as an issue as to what extent, if at all, is compensation required. Before sort of getting into that, I invite listeners to go and have a look at law schools around the Western world and note how, or to what extent, law courses have been infiltrated and subverted and turned into just social justice playgrounds. They're not about the law and about facts and evidence, and they're more about, if not all about, social justice issues, social engineering, and they're treating the courses, really the law course, as something that is to treat all law as effectively an issue of tort, T-O-R-T, meaning that the party, the supposed ideological victim party, the brown person, the black person, through the courts, they must receive, or are entitled to receive. It is imperative they receive compensation from the white people for past misdeeds or past sufferings on the basis that they were held back and they were denied, and they had opportunities and goods and services in effect stolen from them, and that they're entitled to therefore to receive compensation for those losses and for that damage to their lifestyle. Now, it presupposes, of course, that all black and brown people were good, living a white middle class existence, and which they weren't. We're talking people in Africa that hadn't even discovered the wheel, for goodness sake. So the whole thing comes crashing down pretty quickly when you put it, you analyze it. But I do want to go through the logic that they're applying, or at least some of it, so that it's more understandable what they're trying to do. But in so doing, it'll really reveal that it's just a massive grift and a hustle, and it's being used not to compensate or uplift black and brown people, but to destroy white people, other than, of course, the elites. They're not going to pay for this. Now, if we go back to the sort of 1950s and 60s, the African American agitation and hustling and complaints. Now, they complained that black kids weren't getting an equal shake in, say, university education. I'll use that as probably a good example. They're saying that if there's a bright black kid who's doing really well at school, then shouldn't they, like any student, be, they're doing well and they're a bright kid, shouldn't they, like any student, be entitled to go to university? Now, I would argue yes is the answer to that. If they're a bright kid and they're capable of going through the rigor of that sort of education, then why not? I don't see a problem. Now, the people who are opposed to it, which are really in a collection of 4 or 5 southern states, like Alabama or something like that, and were against it. They were saying that, well, the standard of education in the black high schools is much lower, so really these kids aren't meeting an independent standard, and they should meet that independent standard before going to university. Now, when at any time the black kids were required to sit an independent exam that the white kids would sit with the same level of rigor and so on, then most of them failed. there were still a few that would have made it to university, and I don't see a problem with why they wouldn't have been allowed to go. The second complaint that the white university authorities and education authorities made was that once black people get in, the whole community sort of moves in. So they perceive that once a single black person is in the university, that the university is then effectively an enclave of black society. So the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, and the whole village comes over, and they sort of hang around and so on, because that's now their property as well. In the same way that a lot of communities, if a black person gets a job in a grocery store, that the whole tribe believes that now all the products in the grocery store are now communally owned. So this attitude of communal ownership and communal association was something that was completely opposite to the way white society functioned. And so there were some various social and other issues. Now, how many black kids would have made it at university in somewhere like Alabama? Wouldn't have been very many. It would have been a small handful. Should they have been permitted to go to university? Yes. But how many black kids were denied that opportunity? I don't know. Could they have actually hacked university in terms of the rigor and the discipline required to study and get good grades and come out with a degree? Probably fewer again. So the issue is really a non-issue. I'd be surprised if even a small handful of black kids per year would have made it through. Nonetheless, they still, in my view, should have been entitled to go. So the arguments were already sort of going along ideological lines about now the idea that every black person in America was oppressed in the 1950s and 60s is simply not true. There were, again, a clutch of southern states that had, today we would call it racist, but they had views about mixing black and white communities and all this sort of thing. And they saw it as being quite reasonable and sensible given the circumstances. The idea that it was all, and primarily, if you look at the way the legislation and various laws were framed, it was to do with behavioural differences, not racial differences. Now, sure, there was a typecast thing where most blacks behave this way, therefore we will make a blanket law, but not all did. And again, there were kids that would have gone to university, not many, but some would have gone to university and they'd have done okay. And they probably would have come out with degrees. Now, they could have moved to another part of the United States. So many of those black people were directly adjacent to another state that did accept black kids into university. Why didn't they just go there? If just going to university was the issue, then why didn't they go there? But the race hustlers and grifters were hard at work even back then. They wanted to create an issue. They wanted the drama. They wanted the conflict. They wanted the confrontation, because that gave them power and currency and so on. But this idea, again, that all black people were being denied and thus all black people should have been compensated or are entitled to or deserve compensation, that's not true either. The black people in the northeast of the United States, for example, they have been able to go to university for years. So that was only an issue in a small part of the United States. This idea it was universal is simply not true. They did have a point, though, that if a black kid did well enough to go to university, then they should have been entitled to go, no matter where they were. And I agree with that. Now, that's a clear case of someone being denied something that under normal conditions they would have been entitled to. So, say if they got the same grade as a white kid, the white kid would have gone to university. So we're saying, well, that's terrible. It's universal. But if you were even looking at 50 black kids per year, even that's generous, per year in those states, then that would have been it. So we're talking a very, spread across multiple universities. So we're talking a very small number of people. Could it be argued that they're entitled to some sort of compensation? You probably could make an argument for that. Now, how much compensation or that we could debate, but it's only a very small amount of people. the vast majority of black kids were flunking out of high school at 14. They didn't have a slightest chance of making it through senior high school or university. What compensation are they entitled to? Any? There were white kids that were held back because their families were poor and the kids had to go to start work early and as soon as they could to earn an income to bring into the household. Should those kids have got entitled to compensation? Now, today the idea of compensation is ideological. Black activists and grifters are able to, so they can reach back to, we can go back to slavery, days of slavery, saying, well, we were held back. Well, that's not true either. The claim is that white people forcibly took them, grabbed them in Africa and brought them to. That's not true either. They're saying that black people had a lower standard of living in the United States than they did in Africa. That's not true. They're saying that black people had a shorter lifespan in the white society in North America than they did in Africa. That's not true either. So one by one, as you go through the claims, which are the justifications for compensation, they revolve around a concept of tort, that the black person should be restored or restored back to the condition, this is like financial and so on, the condition they were in before the injustice of the deprivation was done. Now, so you've got a black peasant living hand to mouth with a life expectancy, they'd be lucky to make 40, a constant state of tribal warfare, black tribes enslaving each other. The chances were very high, that they would be much higher than actually going to North America, that they would be made a slave by another black tribe and treated, because the supply of slaves was so high that the slaves were treated like shit in Africa. Whereas, because the investment in slaves was so great in North America, the idea of you had to keep your slaves in fit, healthy working condition, otherwise they wouldn't do the work. And the idea of ownership of another human being, you need to really sort of understand that in those times, slavery was just seen as a labor exchange. It wasn't seen as slavery. It wasn't perceived through that lens. Now it is, but then it was just seen as a labor exchange. You were just getting workers. That's all you were doing. You weren't enslaving another person on some moral dimension. You were just getting a worker. That was it. And black people were selected not because, or preferred, not selected, preferred, not because they were, in any way desirable, other than they were very resistant to white man's diseases and also were resistant to other diseases that were around, in the swamps of Alabama or something, and they could survive, difficult climatic conditions like the hot weather and so on that white people struggled with. So they're being selected because they were the hardiest folks. The other groups would have been much cheaper and easier and more accessible, but they just weren't any good. So the black people were preferred on that basis, as in black workers I'm talking. So when you look at the idea of tort, saying, well, white people grabbed us out of it, they didn't. White people transported us to the Americas. Well, that's true. That's a statement of the obvious. So white people housed us, clothed us, and fed us, and in return we worked. Okay, so there's no tort angle there. White people deprived us of a middle class existence with cell phones and no, they didn't. Okay. You're in a society that was in a constant state of famine and civil war and endless and slavery and a wretched, brutal existence of a Stone Age existence, and then you're brought to the most a country where it's got the most advanced technology in the world and advanced medicine and medical care. I mean, you got the whole thing, and you're saying you're worse off. So that's simply not true. You have a longer life expectancy, a better diet, and a much safer existence. There's no one running around trying to kill you. there's no tribe coming along and trying to kill you or drag you off for a far more brutal servitude than ever existed in America. So the whole tort thing comes down to we were enslaved. Well, okay, that again is a statement of the obvious, but in what way were you deprived? We're deprived of liberty, but you didn't have liberty in Africa anyway. So the idea you had this liberty in the first place is simply not true. So you can't be compensated for something that you never had in the first place. In terms of the modern era, the black grifters, or it could be any minority, it doesn't matter. They're using the same sort of your Marxist type argument is, okay, well, we can't really define what we were deprived, but we can say that you guys are rich and we were not. Therefore, you only became rich because you stole everything from us, or you stole our labor or the fruits of our labor and so on and so forth. Well, that's not true either, and that could easily apply to anybody. Anybody who's not rich could claim that the reason they were not rich was because someone stole it from them, whether they stole opportunity or whether they stole goods and services or whatever it might have been. That's the argument that the Indians, for example, use today. The reason India is not rich today is because white people stole everything. I mean, you're right. So it's a universal Marxist argument, which the Marxists use. The proletariat worker, why are you not rich? It's because that industrialist over there, he's only rich because he stole it from you. Is he rich because he invented the steam engine? Is he rich because he invented some new factory spinning jenny or something? Is he rich because of that? Is he rich because he risked everything building a factory and putting machine? No. He's rich just because he stole it from you. Again, that doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. So one by one, the reasons for the compensation built around tort and restoring justice, restoring supposedly lost wealth, opportunity, or both. This is simply not true. And as you go through it, even if you look at, say, wherever black people went around the world, whether it be in the Caribbean or into North America, or it doesn't matter, wherever, they're on average far richer, far better off, live longer, live healthier lives than they ever would if they'd stayed in Africa. So this idea again of compensation and tort is nonsense. Now, more recently, the claim is the claims of compensation are harder to reconcile because when any black person says, well, what rights do you not have that a white person has? Racism is everywhere. Where? And they can't explain it. So there's no idea. So they come back to the idea of non-equal outcomes. There are more wealthy white people than there are black people. There are more white people in, or more recently Asians. There's more white people in, say, better paid managerial type jobs than black people, and they'll point to the lack of equal outcomes as being proof of deprivation of some sort, and thus the entitlement to compensation. Again, that falls under scrutiny. That falls apart. So you under the right, other than the righteous moralizing of outcomes are unequal, and then going back 400 years to supposed slavery and so on. The moral argument of someone being enslaved is really the sole basis for their claim for compensation. But again, under the slightest scrutiny, it falls to pieces, and so this is something that I hope can be done away with, in the short-term future, because it's dividing society. Johnny, think about the effect of this. If you've been told for 50 years or more, through the schools, the education system more broadly, through propaganda and through agitators, through the NGOs, you've been told that you're an oppressed people. You've been denied everything evilly and wickedly and viciously, and denied everything. You would have lived in a waterfront mansion. If you're a black guy, waterfront mansion with lots of hot blonde white chicks and fancy. You would have had it all if only those damn white people hadn't taken it from you and prevented you from having it. Now, if you've already got an IQ of 80, that's an easy. That's why I'm not rich. And when you get enough people being told that for long enough time, which they have, then the ingredients for social conflict or increasing social conflict are all there, and no one's attempting, as I can see, to diffuse this. And there should be, I believe, a real focus now and going forward on diffusing these invented tensions that never should have existed in the first place. Going back to, say, Martin Luther King's speeches, the content of the character and all that sort of stuff, that's been dispensed with, and it's now, if I don't get equal outcomes, Whitey, I'll kill you. I mean, oh, goodness me, how did it come to this? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.